A young prince walked into the forest, believing that the man beside him had been sent to protect him. The morning was cool, the ground was wet beneath the horses, and mist hung between the trees of the Clent Hills. Somewhere beyond the narrow path, birds moved through branches that had not yet been warmed by the sun. The boy was royal, or so the story would later say, the son of one of the most powerful kings in early medieval England. His name was Kenelm. The adult who traveled with him was his guardian, tutor, or trusted retainer, a man allowed close enough to know where the prince would go when he would be alone, and how easily a hunting journey could become an execution. Kenelm had no reason to expect betrayal. Danger usually announced itself through armed riders, rival banners, or the shouting of men at the gates of a royal hall. This danger smiled, rode at his side, and waited for the forest to hide what came next. According to the legend, the prince had already been warned. The night before the journey, he had dreamed of a magnificent tree covered with flowers and lights. From its upper branches, he could see his kingdom spread beneath him, but then the tree was cut down. He changed into a white bird and rose toward heaven. The dream was a vision of his own death, yet Kenelm was too young, too innocent, or too trusting to escape it. Deep in the woods, his guardian prepared to strike. Some versions of the tale say a grave had already been dug. Others describe the prince placing a staff into the earth, where it miraculously took root, as though the landscape itself understood that a saint was about to die. Then the weapon fell. The child was killed, his head severed, and his body concealed beneath a thorn tree where no courtier, priest, or soldier was expected to find him. The murderer returned without the prince. The forest closed over the grave. Silence should have completed the crime. But this was not merely a murder story. It was a saint's legend, and in such a story, heaven could reveal what politics tried to hide. A white dove was said to have carried news of the killing all the way to Rome. The prince's grave would be discovered, miracles would follow, and Kenelm would become one of medieval England's most celebrated royal martyrs. Yet the darkest accusation in the legend did not fall upon the man who held the weapon. It fell upon the prince's own sister. Her name was Cwenthryth. She was a daughter of King Coenwulf of Mercia, a powerful abbess, an heiress to valuable religious estates, and a woman capable of confronting some of the most influential churchmen in England. Centuries after her lifetime, storytellers claimed that she had ordered the murder because she wanted her brother's throne. They transformed her into the jealous sister. Behind the blade, the woman who exchanged family blood for power. But did Cwenthryth truly arrange the death of her own brother? Or did a later age create the perfect villain for the perfect saint? The answer lies somewhere between a violent legend, a handful of royal documents, and the political ruins of a kingdom that disappeared more than 1,000 years ago. Before judging Cwenthryth, it is necessary to understand that there are two different women hidden beneath her name. The first is the historical Cwenthryth, a royal daughter who appears briefly in surviving documents from the early 9th century. She witnessed at least one charter as the daughter of the king. She later became an abbess and held authority over important religious communities and estates. She inherited not only wealth, but also a dangerous dispute between her father and Archbishop Wilfrid of Canterbury. In records created close to her lifetime, she is not described as a murderer. She is a landholder, a religious superior, a member of the Mercian royal family, and a formidable participant in a struggle over property and control. The second Cwenthryth belongs to legend. That woman is consumed by jealousy. She sees a young brother standing between herself and kingship. She hires or persuades a trusted guardian to lead him into the woods, watches from a distance, while another person performs the killing, and attempts to erase the victim from memory. When the murder is exposed by divine power, she resists the saint and is punished. The legendary Cwenthryth is not complicated. She exists so that Kenelm's innocence can shine more brightly. The more ambitious, unnatural, and cruel she becomes, the more holy her brother appears. The gap between these two portraits is the heart of the mystery. The detailed murder narrative was not written by an eyewitness standing near the Clent Hills. It developed long after the supposed event, within a religious culture that valued stories of innocent princes, miraculous revelations, sacred bodies, and divine justice. Such stories were not necessarily deliberate lies. Medieval writers often believed that moral and spiritual truth could be expressed through narrative traditions that modern historians would treat cautiously. A saint's life was written to inspire devotion, defend a cult, explain a shrine, attract pilgrims, teach obedience, and demonstrate that God protected the innocent. It was not a police report. This does not prove that no crime occurred. Legends can preserve distorted memories of real conflict. A prince may have died violently. A succession struggle may have divided the royal family. A later monastery may have inherited fragments of an older tradition that can no longer be recovered. But every dramatic detail must be weighed against the evidence that survives. When the story tells us what Cwenthryth thought, what she whispered to an accomplice, and why she wanted her brother dead, we are hearing the voice of later storytellers, not the voice of Cwenthryth herself. When a charter records her status, her offices, or a dispute over land, we are closer to the world in which she actually lived. The investigation, therefore, requires two journeys. One leads into the legendary forest where Kenelm dies. The other leads through royal halls, councils, monasteries, charters, and legal settlements. Only by following both can we understand how an abbess became accused of one of the most shocking family crimes in early English history. In the early 9th century, there was no single nation called England in the modern political sense. The island contained several competing Anglo-Saxon kingdoms whose borders shifted with war, marriage, rebellion, and the strength of individual rulers. Northumbria stretched across much of the north. East Anglia occupied the eastern lands. Wessex was rising in the south and southwest. Kent possessed an old royal identity, even when dominated by more powerful neighbors. At the center stood Mercia, a kingdom whose influence had spread far beyond the Midlands. Under King Offa, in the late 8th century, Mercia had become the greatest power in southern Britain. Offa controlled or intimidated neighboring rulers, negotiated with continental kings, issued impressive coinage, and built the enormous earthwork now known as Offa's Dyke along part of the Welsh frontier. His authority was not the authority of a modern state. It depended on personal loyalty, military success, tribute, religious alliances, and control of land. A king traveled between royal estates with his household, consumed food rents owed by local communities, granted privileges to followers, and expected nobles to appear at councils and in war. Written charters recorded gifts and exchanges of land, but parchment alone could not protect a ruler whose supporters abandoned him. Succession was especially uncertain. Kingship did not always pass automatically from father to eldest son. A royal family might contain several men with claims, and powerful nobles could decide which candidate appeared most capable of protecting the kingdom. A young heir could be crowned during his father's lifetime, yet still fail to inherit. A brother, uncle, cousin, or distant branch of the dynasty might replace him. Royal blood created opportunity, but it also created danger. Within this world, monasteries were not quiet institutions separated from politics. They controlled farms, woodland, labor, tolls, buildings, and rights that produced wealth over generations. Some religious houses were governed by members of royal families. Men and women who became abbots or abbesses could exercise authority over large territories and dependents. A royal monastery could preserve a family's memory, house its tombs, and secure property that might otherwise pass to rivals. The boundary between private family possession and ecclesiastical property was not always clear. Kings sometimes treated religious houses as part of a dynastic inheritance, while bishops and archbishops argued that churches should remain under proper spiritual authority. These conflicts were not abstract debates. They involved revenue, influence, and the right to appoint leaders. Cwenthryth grew up inside this political landscape. She would have understood that land meant survival, that religious office could carry secular power, and that the death of one ruler could rearrange an entire network of loyalties. To modern audiences, the legend presents a simple motive. A sister kills a brother to become queen. To a Mercian noble, the situation would have been far more complicated. Even if Kenelm had died, Cwenthryth could not simply place a crown on her head and command the kingdom. Mercian kingship depended on acceptance by leading men, military authority, and royal custom that strongly favored male rulers. Her true power was more likely to lie in the monasteries, estates, and family rights she controlled. This difference matters. The legendary motive assumes a path to power that may never have existed. Yet the danger surrounding royal succession was real. When a king died, old alliances weakened, property was contested, and those who had benefited from his rule could become vulnerable. The story of Kenelm emerged from a society that knew families could destroy themselves over inheritance. Even if its details were invented, its fear was believable. The man at the center of Mercia before the alleged murder was King Coenwulf, Cwenthryth's father. He came to power in 796 after the death of Offa and the extremely brief reign of Offa's son, Ecgfrith. The succession itself demonstrated how quickly a royal plan could collapse. Offa had worked to secure his son's future, but Ecgfrith survived as king for only a short time. Coenwulf belonged to another branch of the Mercian royal line and had to establish his legitimacy in a kingdom accustomed to Offa's dominance. He proved to be an energetic and forceful ruler. Mercian power continued across much of southern England during his reign, though maintaining that power required campaigns, negotiations, and control of Kent. One of the harshest episodes associated with Coenwulf occurred when Eadbert Pran rebelled and claimed the Kentish kingship. Coenwulf eventually defeated him. Later accounts say the captive was mutilated, a brutal demonstration of what happened to men who challenged Mercian authority. This was the political culture in which Cwenthryth was raised. Royal legitimacy could be defended through law, religion, and spectacular violence. Coenwulf also became involved in a prolonged conflict with Archbishop Wulfrid of Canterbury. The dispute concerned the control of religious houses and property, especially institutions in Kent. To the king, placing royal relatives or loyal supporters over monasteries could strengthen dynastic power. To the archbishop, royal control threatened the church's independence and Canterbury's authority. Cwenthryth eventually inherited the consequences of this struggle. She was not an unnoticed daughter living at the edge of the court. A charter from 811 identifies her as the king's daughter, evidence that she occupied a recognized place in the royal family. She later became associated with Winchcombe and with religious communities at Minster and Thanet and Reculver. These institutions were valuable, and control of them was politically sensitive. Coenwulf's family appears to have treated some monastic possessions as a form of hereditary interest. The archbishop viewed such control very differently. The surviving evidence therefore shows Cwenthryth entering public life not through a secret murder, but through the legal and religious structures of her father's rule. Kenelm, usually identified with a royal figure named Kenelm, also appears in the uncertain shadows of documentary history. His exact age, position, and fate are difficult to establish. Later legend calls him a child who inherited Mercia after Coenwulf's death. Yet Coenwulf was historically succeeded by his brother Coelwulf, not by a 7-year-old king whose reign was ended by assassination. This single fact creates a serious problem for the traditional story. If Kenelm did not actually rule as the legend claims, then Cwenthryth did not remove a reigning child king in order to take his throne. Some scholars have suggested that Kenelm may have been an adult royal son who died around the time of his father, possibly before or during the succession crisis. His name appears in records connected with the family, but the evidence does not reveal a murder. The silence left by his disappearance allowed later generations to imagine one. Coenwulf died in 821, and his death exposed the fragility of his dynasty. His brother Ceolwulf became king, but was removed within a short period. Power passed to other Mercian rulers, while Wessex grew stronger under King Egbert. Cwenthryth inherited religious offices and property, but not the Mercian throne. The royal world her father had built began to come apart. In the middle of that collapse, a dead or vanished royal son could become the focus of memory, rumor, and eventually sainthood. The historical Cwenthryth is most visible when she is defending property. That fact may sound ordinary, but in early medieval England, control of land could determine whether a family remained powerful or disappeared. As abbess, Cwenthryth was not merely responsible for prayer and discipline within a religious community. She could oversee estates, receive rents, manage dependents, and represent institutional interests before kings, bishops, and councils. Her authority rested partly on her religious position and partly on her royal birth. After Coenwulf's death, Archbishop Wilfrid renewed efforts to recover control over properties that he believed belonged under Canterbury. The dispute outlived the king and fell upon his daughter. Surviving records portray a bitter legal struggle. One document from 824 concerns land said to have been improperly acquired by Cwenthryth, abbess of Minster and Thanet. Other settlements involve the restoration of estates and the recognition of Canterbury's rights. The language of such records can be hostile because legal documents were created to justify one side's claim. They show conflict, but they do not show murder. Cwenthryth appears as a woman unwilling to surrender valuable possessions without resistance. To her enemies, that resistance may have seemed arrogant, unlawful, or dangerous. To her supporters, she may have been protecting the inheritance entrusted to her by her father. The difference between these interpretations is crucial. Medieval political memory was often written by institutions that survived. Royal dynasties could vanish, but monasteries and cathedral communities continued copying documents, celebrating saints, and preserving stories. Canterbury had scribes. Winchcombe had monks. Each community remembered the past in ways connected to its interests. A woman who had fought an archbishop over land could be remembered less kindly by churchmen than a woman who had surrendered immediately. This does not mean that Wilfrid or his successors invented the Kenelm legend as a calculated act of revenge. The development of tradition is rarely so simple. Stories grow through sermons, local devotion, political needs, oral memory, and the creative work of generations. Yet Cwenthryth's documented conflict offered a believable foundation for villainy. She was royal, she was powerful, she possessed disputed religious wealth, she resisted a leading churchman. Later writers did not need to invent an entirely new personality. They could exaggerate qualities already associated with her public reputation. Determination became greed. Authority became ambition. Legal resistance became contempt for the church. A dispute over estates became evidence that she would do anything for power. Eventually, the sister who fought over land could be transformed into the sister who killed for a crown. Gender likely shaped this transformation. Early medieval women could possess land, lead religious houses, witness charters, and influence dynastic politics, but later moral narratives often treated female ambition as a source of disorder. The ideal religious woman was obedient, humble, and detached from worldly power. Cwenthryth, at least in the surviving conflict, was none of those things. She defended her position publicly. A male noble who protected inherited estates might be described as forceful. A royal abbess who did the same could become unnatural in the imagination of hostile writers. The legendary Cwenthryth resembles other dangerous women in medieval storytelling: the jealous queen, the murderous stepmother, the poisoner, the seductress, and the usurper who attacks the rightful male heir. Her crime is not only murder. It is the rejection of the role the story expects her to accept. The historical record allows us to say that Cwenthryth was formidable. It does not allow us to say that she was bloodthirsty. That accusation belongs to the legend, and the legend begins by making Kenelm everything she is not. Who, then, was Kenelm? The safest answer is also the least satisfying. He was probably a member of Coenwulf's royal family, remembered under the Old English name Kenelm, but the details of his life are uncertain. Later devotion transformed him into Saint Kenelm, a child prince whose innocence and violent death made him a powerful symbol. The legend gives him a clear biography. He is the son of Coenwulf, the rightful heir to Mercia, and only 7 years old when his father dies. Because he is too young to understand the dangers surrounding the throne, he depends on adults who should protect him. His sister Cwenthryth envies him because his sex and birth allow him to become king while she remains excluded. She therefore chooses murder. Every part of this biography serves the moral structure of the tale. Kenelm's youth removes suspicion that he caused the conflict. His royal birth raises the stakes. His trust makes the betrayal more painful. His prophetic dream shows divine favor. His death turns him into a martyr. His miraculous discovery proves that justice exists beyond the court. But the documentary traces of Kenelm do not fit comfortably with the image of a 7-year-old successor in 821. Evidence connected to the royal family suggests that he may have been born much earlier and could have been an adult by the time Coenwulf died. His name appears in charter traditions, though the authenticity and dating of individual documents must be treated carefully. More importantly, the known royal succession did not place a child named Kenelm on the throne. Ceolwulf, Coenwulf's brother, succeeded him. This does not prove that Kenelm had no claim, or that he did not die in suspicious circumstances. Royal sons could be designated as heirs and still be displaced. Documents could omit failed candidates. Violent deaths were not always recorded. Yet historians cannot build a murder case from absence alone. The disappearance of a name from the record tells us that a person ceased to appear. It does not tell us who killed him, where he died, or what his sister wanted. Kenelm's cult appears more clearly in later centuries. By the late Anglo-Saxon period, he was honored as a saint, and his association with Winchcombe became important. This indicates that people believed a holy royal figure named Kenelm deserved veneration. It does not establish every detail of the surviving narrative. Saints' cults often changed over time. A local holy person could acquire a royal genealogy. An unexplained death could become martyrdom. A grave could be connected to miracles. Rival institutions could compete over relics. Later authors could reshape older traditions to reflect current anxieties. By the 11th and 12th centuries, England had experienced Viking invasions, royal assassinations, dynastic collapse, conquest, and repeated struggles between kings and churchmen. Audiences understood stories in which an innocent heir was betrayed by family. They also understood the power of a saint whose body exposed hidden crime. Kenelm became more than a forgotten prince. He became the center of a story about the limits of earthly power. A murderer could hide evidence from a kingdom, but not from God. A child could lose a throne and gain eternal authority. A royal sister could win a political struggle and still be defeated by memory. These themes explain why the legend survived, even if they do not tell us how the historical Kenelm died. According to the later tale, Coenwulf's death left Mercia in the hands of a child. The royal hall filled with uncertainty. Nobles looked toward the boy who carried the blood of the dead king, but lacked the strength to command warriors. Priests offered prayers. Advisors discussed guardianship. Men who had obeyed Coenwulf began measuring their chances under a new reign. In the center of this tension stood Kenelm, too young to understand that a crown could turn every relative into a possible rival. Cwenthryth watched him, and the legend enters her mind with complete confidence. It tells us that she hated the boy because he possessed what she desired. If Kenelm lived, he would be king. If he died, she imagined that Mercia might become hers. There is no contemporary letter in which she confesses such ambition. No witness records her words. The motive is literary, created to make the crime understandable to an audience familiar with the destructive hunger for power. Yet the scene has emotional force because it places family affection against royal inheritance. Cwenthryth is not accused of killing an unknown rival. She is accused of looking at her own brother and seeing only an obstacle. The legend then gives Kenelm a warning. He dreams that he climbs a great tree. The tree is decorated with flowers and shining lamps. and from its height he can see the territories of his kingdom. It is both a family tree and a symbol of royal authority, rooted in the earth but reaching toward heaven. Suddenly the tree falls. The child changes into a bird and flies upward. When he tells the dream, someone close to him recognizes its meaning. Death is approaching. In many medieval stories, dreams reveal truths that waking characters cannot understand. The dream also protects Kenelm from appearing foolish. He does not walk into danger because the story lacks a warning. He walks into danger because innocence cannot imagine the full depth of treachery. His fate has already been transformed from political death into sacred martyrdom. Cwenthryth now needs an accomplice. Later versions give the man names such as Ascobert and describe him as Kenelm's tutor, guardian, or person intimately connected to the royal household. Some accounts make him Cwenthryth's lover, adding sexual corruption to political betrayal. This detail belongs to the legend's effort to darken her character. A powerful woman becomes not only ambitious, but also manipulative, using intimacy to command violence. The exact form of the relationship varies, but its narrative purpose remains clear. Ascobert can approach Kenelm without raising suspicion. He has the boy's trust. He knows his movements. He can separate him from the court under the harmless excuse of hunting. Most importantly, he allows Cwenthryth to remain physically distant from the killing while making her morally responsible for every blow. The legendary conspiracy is simple. She promises reward or advancement. He agrees to remove the prince. A journey into the countryside is arranged. The court expects Kenelm to return. The grave is prepared in advance. In some retellings, Ascobert first attempts to dig the burial place, but Kenelm miraculously redirects events. In others, the child knows more than his murderer realizes. The variations reveal how oral and written traditions changed, but they share the same emotional structure. The trusted adult has already decided that the child beside him is a corpse. The journey begins not as an adventure, but as a funeral whose victim does not yet know he is dead. The road from the royal center toward the Clent Hills carried Kenelm away from witnesses. In the 9th century, much of the landscape was shaped by woodland, pasture, cultivated clearings, streams and settlements connected by paths that could become nearly impassable in bad weather. The forest in the legend is more than a location. It is the opposite of the royal hall. At court, identity is public. A prince is surrounded by attendants, ritual, and obligations. In the forest, rank offers no protection. There are no assembled nobles to object, no priest to demand an oath, and no written record of what occurs. Ascobert chooses a place where the earth can keep a secret. Imagine the boy riding ahead beneath tall branches, perhaps asking when the hunt will begin, perhaps thinking of the dream that had disturbed his sleep. Behind him, the guardian watches the distance between the trees and listens for other travelers. Every familiar gesture becomes part of the deception. A reassuring word keeps Kenelm calm. A change of direction leads him deeper into isolation. A pause near a clearing appears ordinary. The man who is supposed to guard him is searching for the moment when trust becomes helplessness. Medieval versions of the story introduce miraculous signs before the killing. Kenelm may drive a staff into the ground and cause it to bloom, an image of life emerging at the edge of death. The staff declares that the child belongs to heaven before the murderer can claim him. The legend may also describe failed preparations for the grave, as if the land resists the crime. Such details are not evidence in a modern sense, but they show how medieval audiences understood holiness. Nature recognizes the saint. The murderer does not. When Ascobert finally attacks, the story rarely needs prolonged violence. The horror lies in betrayal. Kenelm turns and sees the weapon in the hands of the man he trusted. Perhaps the guardian hesitates. Perhaps he remembers the promise that awaits him if he returns without the boy. Perhaps he fears Cwenthryth, or perhaps he shares her ambition. The surviving tradition cannot tell us, because the man himself may be as legendary as the conversation that condemned Kenelm. The blow falls. The prince is beheaded, and the child who was supposed to inherit a kingdom becomes a hidden body beneath a thorn. The killer covers the grave. Soil erases blood. Leaves settle. The horse is led away. By the time Ascobert returns to the royal world, the murder site has become indistinguishable from the surrounding forest. The political logic of the crime depends on disappearance. A public execution would create witnesses and resistance. A visible corpse might inspire loyalty. A funeral would confirm the prince's identity and offer a place where supporters could gather. By hiding the body, the conspirators hope to remove not only Kenelm's life, but also his meaning. Without a grave, there can be no cult. Without a body, rumors can be controlled. Without proof, Cwenthryth can deny everything. This logic reflects a genuine medieval concern. The bodies of rulers and saints possessed political power. Burial places connected dynasties to sacred institutions. Relics could attract pilgrims, wealth, and prestige. To conceal a royal body was therefore to attack memory itself. In the legend, however, the conspirators misunderstand the kind of victim they have created. Kenelm no longer needs a throne, an army, or a court. His power now comes from martyrdom. The moment he dies, the silence of the forest becomes temporary. Heaven has seen the crime. The grave that should erase him will become the place from which his story spreads. Far from the Clent Hills, the legend says, a white dove appeared in Rome. It carried a message written in words that revealed where the murdered prince lay. The image joins the local landscape of Mercia to the center of Western Christianity. Cwenthryth may control the court, the guardian, and the path into the forest, but she cannot control Rome. The dove crosses every boundary that protects the crime. It passes beyond royal authority, beyond Mercian politics, and beyond the silence of the murderer. At the feet of the Pope, the truth arrives in a form no earthly conspirator can intercept. Different versions preserve different wording for the message, but its meaning is unmistakable. Kenelm, born of a king, lies beneath a thorn in the Clent country, his head cut from his body. The Pope responds by sending instructions to England, and a search begins. Historically, this miraculous communication cannot be verified. Narratively, it is perfect. A hidden local murder receives universal recognition. The child whom his sister allegedly treated as disposable becomes known at the highest level of the church. Searchers travel toward the place named in the message. The journey reverses the murderer's path. Ascobert led Kenelm away from community into secrecy. The recovery party moves from public revelation toward the secret grave. As they approach, miraculous light or signs guide them. Beneath the thorn, the earth releases the body. Some accounts say a spring burst from the ground when Kenelm is found, its water offering healing. The landscape that concealed the crime is transformed into sacred geography. The tree, grave, spring, and path become physical proof for believers. Pilgrims can stand where the saint died. They can drink, pray, remember, and carry the story home. The discovery also creates a new conflict. Religious communities may compete for possession of the body, because relics bring honor and influence. In versions of Kenelm's legend, men connected with Worcester challenge those carrying the remains toward Winchcombe. The saint's body becomes the center of institutional rivalry, demonstrating that even a story celebrating divine justice remains tied to earthly interests. Eventually, Kenelm is brought to Winchcombe, the monastery associated with his family. Bells ring without human hands, or other miracles announce his arrival. The murdered child enters the religious house not as a defeated prince, but as a victorious saint. Cwenthryth's supposed plan has failed in every possible way. She wanted silence. The whole country hears the story. She wanted the body forgotten. It becomes a relic. She wanted power. Pilgrims honor the brother she tried to remove. The legend sometimes adds a punishment directed at her. When the bells announce the recovery, she looks toward Winchcombe and reacts with anger or disbelief. In one tradition, her eyes fall from her head as divine judgment. The image is brutal and symbolic. She refused to see the holiness of her brother, so sight is taken from her. Again, this belongs to moral storytelling rather than verifiable biography. The historical Cwenthryth continued to appear in property disputes after the period in which the murder was supposed to have occurred. There is no contemporary record of a miraculous punishment. Yet the later tale requires one because a saint's victory must be complete. Kenelm's body is restored, his innocence proclaimed, and the woman accused of ordering his death is marked by God. The hidden grave has become a courtroom, and heaven has delivered the verdict before history has examined the evidence. Kenelm's transformation from a royal figure to saint did not happen in a single moment. Cults developed through repeated acts of remembrance. Monks celebrated feast days, preserved relics, told stories to visitors, copied manuscripts, and connected local traditions to wider religious themes. Winchcombe had powerful reasons to honor a saint associated with Mercian royalty. A royal martyr gave the community sacred prestige and linked it to the kingdom's past. Pilgrims brought attention and offerings. Miracles strengthened belief. A story that explained how the body came to the monastery also defended the monastery's right to possess it. Over generations, the narrative could become more detailed. Uncertainty was replaced by character. A forgotten death received a murderer. A disputed succession received a jealous sister. A burial received a miraculous discovery. A local saint received recognition from Rome. By the high Middle Ages, Kenelm's fame extended far beyond the Midlands. Writers referred to him, preachers used him as an example, and pilgrims traveled to his shrine. Geoffrey Chaucer would later mention the story of Kenelm's prophetic dream in the Canterbury Tales, evidence that the legend was recognizable to educated audiences centuries after the supposed murder. This cultural success does not prove the historical crime, but it explains why the accusation against Cwenthryth became so durable. Saints need opponents. The moral clarity of martyrdom depends on a contrast between innocence and wickedness. Kenelm is young, obedient, and spiritually pure. Ascobert is treacherous, but as the hired hand, he is not the deepest source of evil. Cwenthryth becomes the will behind the act. She corrupts guardian, family, and kingdom. Her royal blood makes the betrayal more shocking because she violates the bonds that should be strongest. Her religious position makes it worse because an abbess should reject worldly ambition, not kill for it. The legend, therefore, attacks her on every level. As a sister, she is unnatural. As a royal woman, she is usurping. As a religious woman, she is hypocritical. As a political actor, she is greedy. As an opponent of the saint, she is spiritually blind. No ordinary defense can survive such a complete literary condemnation. Once Cwenthryth is placed inside the structure, every known fact about her can be reinterpreted as evidence of guilt. Her inheritance shows greed. Her authority shows ambition. Her legal disputes show lawlessness. Her resistance to Canterbury shows hostility toward the church. Even the absence of a confession can be treated as proof of secrecy. This is how reputation can become circular. The legend assumes she is wicked, and then her wickedness explains the legend. Modern historical investigation must break that circle. It must ask not only whether the story is possible, but when it appeared, who preserved it, what purposes it served, and how well it matches contemporary evidence. The cult of Kenelm tells us that medieval people believed in the meaning of his martyrdom. It tells us about memory, pilgrimage, sacred geography, and ideas of innocent kingship. It may preserve an echo of dynastic violence, but it cannot by itself establish that Cwenthryth ordered a murder. Devotion and evidence answer different questions. The first asks what a community found spiritually true. The second asks what can be demonstrated about events. Kenelm's sainthood belongs securely to the history of medieval belief. Cwenthryth's guilt remains an accusation. Still, the accusation cannot be dismissed without examining why it seemed plausible. The case against Cwenthryth begins with opportunity. She stood close to the Mercian royal family and could have known the people surrounding Kenelm. If a conspiracy existed, the king's daughter might have been able to recruit servants, guardians, or nobles. Her rank provided access that an outsider lacked. The second argument is potential benefit. The death of a male royal relative could alter inheritance, leadership, and control of dynastic property. Even if Cwenthryth could not realistically become ruling queen of Mercia, she might have protected her estates or strengthened her influence by removing a competing claimant. Medieval politics offers many examples of relatives imprisoned, blinded, exiled, or killed because their blood made them dangerous. A secret family murder is therefore not impossible merely because the detailed legend is late. The third argument concerns her documented conflict with Archbishop Wulfrid. Cwenthryth was not a passive figure. She held disputed property and defended it. A hostile reader might interpret the records as evidence that she valued wealth and power above religious law. If the same woman had once removed a brother, her later resistance would appear consistent with a lifetime of ambition. The fourth argument is the persistence of the tradition. Kenelm's story became attached to specific places, institutions, and rituals. Local geography often carries memories that written records ignore. A grave beneath a thorn, a spring in the hills, and a route toward Winchcombe may reflect traditions older than the surviving manuscript. Perhaps, defenders of the legend might argue, the miraculous details accumulated around a real act of violence. A royal man named Saint Kenelm died. His sister benefited. The true circumstances were hidden. Later generations recovered the essential memory even if they changed his age and added the dove. This possibility deserves consideration because history is full of events preserved imperfectly. Yet each element of the case has serious weakness. Opportunity proves only that Cwenthryth existed near the relevant family. Benefit is uncertain because the known succession did not make her queen. Her property dispute occurred in a legal and political environment where many powerful people fought over land without committing murder. Persistence proves the strength of belief, not the accuracy of origin. Specific locations can be attached to legends after the stories become popular. The greatest problem remains the absence of a contemporary accusation. Royal murder was not always recorded, but the alleged victim became a saint, and the alleged murderer remained active in high-level disputes. If people close to the events widely believed that she had killed a royal heir, some trace might be expected in charters, letters, annals, or proceedings. Instead, the detailed narrative emerges later. Another problem is Kenelm's age and status. The legend needs a 7-year-old king, but the documentary picture points toward an older royal figure and a different successor. When a story is wrong about the identity and political position of its victim, confidence in its motive and murderer must decline. The case against Cwenthryth is therefore emotionally compelling but evidentially weak. It feels true because it follows a familiar pattern. A jealous sister, an innocent boy, a secret forest, and a miraculous revelation form a narrative that the mind can remember. Charters about estates and jurisdiction feel cold by comparison, but history cannot choose the more vivid account simply because it makes a better story. The case for Cwenthryth's innocence begins with chronology. The farther a source stands from an event, the more opportunities exist for memory to change. Names become confused, motives are simplified, ages are altered, and supernatural themes are added. The developed life of Saint Kenelm belongs to a period long after the early 9th century. By then, Mercia was no longer an independent great power. England had become a unified kingdom, suffered renewed Scandinavian conquest, and experienced the Norman takeover. Winchcombe's monks lived in a world very different from Cwenthryth's. Their story looked backward through centuries of political and religious transformation. A second defense is the silence of contemporary records. Cwenthryth appears as a royal daughter and abbess. She participates in disputes. She loses property. She is accused in legal language of improper possession. Yet she is not charged with fratricide. No surviving judgment removes her from murdering Kenelm. No contemporary churchman condemns her as the killer of a saint. This absence cannot prove innocence, but it sharply limits what can be claimed. A third defense is the instability of the legend's basic facts. Kenelm was probably not the 7-year-old reigning king described in the tale. Coenwulf's brother succeeded to Mercia. If Cwenthryth's alleged motive was to seize the throne from a child king, the historical succession provides little support. A fourth defense concerns institutional memory. Cwenthryth's family had been locked in conflict with Archbishop Wulfrid over royal control of monasteries. The settlement favored Canterbury and weakened her claims. Communities connected to the victorious side preserved records describing her possession as improper. Over time, hostility toward her could have influenced the way she was remembered, even without a deliberate campaign. A woman already associated with contested church property was an easy candidate for the role of enemy in a saint's story. A fifth defense concerns literary pattern. Kenelm belongs to a broader medieval tradition of innocent royal martyrs, often young men killed through treachery. Their stories emphasized prophetic signs, secret murder, discovery of bodies, miracles, and punishment of enemies. These repeated features suggest that authors shaped local traditions according to recognizable models. Cwenthryth's role resembles the wicked female relative found in many moral narratives. The pattern does not mean every event is fictional, but it warns us that character and motive may have been constructed. Finally, there is the question of gender. Royal women in early England could wield real authority, especially through monasteries and estates, but their power could be difficult for later writers to categorize. Cwenthryth did not leave behind a personal account. Men connected to church institutions wrote most of the texts through which she survives. When such a woman resisted an archbishop, the record did not preserve her private reasoning. It preserved the conflict. Later generations could fill that silence with moral suspicion. Her independence became evidence of pride. Her wealth became evidence of greed. Her family position became evidence of ambition. The result is a historical trap. The very facts proving that Cwenthryth was powerful are used to suggest that she was capable of murder, while the lack of direct proof is explained as the success of her secrecy. A fair judgment must reject that logic. Capacity is not guilt. Conflict is not homicide. Reputation is not testimony. The historical Cwenthryth may have been difficult, aggressive, and determined to keep property that Canterbury claimed. She may also have believed sincerely that the estates belonged to her family, and that surrender would betray her father's intentions. Both possibilities are compatible with the evidence. Neither requires a dead brother in the forest. To understand why the legend endured, imagine the experience of a medieval pilgrim approaching Winchcombe on Kenelm's feast day. The traveler does not carry a modern historian's demand for contemporary documentation. He has heard that a royal child was betrayed, that a dove revealed the grave, that healing water flowed, and that miracles occurred near the saint's body. The road itself becomes part of the proof. Other pilgrims walk beside him. Bells sound ahead. Priests repeat the story. The shrine contains relics believed to belong to Kenelm. Sick people pray. Families leave offerings. The collective experience confirms the saint's reality far more powerfully than an argument about succession lists. Cwenthryth appears in this setting not as a disputed historical individual, but as a moral warning. The pilgrim does not need to know the details of her lawsuit with Archbishop Wulfrid. He needs to know that worldly ambition cannot defeat holiness. Kenelm loses his earthly crown, but receives a heavenly one. Cwenthryth seeks control, but becomes condemned. The murderer hides the body, but God reveals it. The lesson is clear, memorable, and emotionally satisfying. It also speaks to universal fears. Families are supposed to protect their children, yet inheritance can turn relatives into enemies. Guardians are supposed to defend the vulnerable, yet access makes betrayal possible. Courts are supposed to deliver justice, yet powerful people can manipulate them. The legend answers these fears by placing final authority outside human institutions. Even when the court fails, heaven sees. Even when a body is hidden, truth travels. Even when the murderer remains unpunished by law, divine judgment arrives. This moral power helps explain why the story outlived the kingdom that produced it. Mercian political structures disappeared, but the emotions remained understandable. Later audiences did not need to know the exact boundaries of 9th century Mercia to fear a sister who wanted power. They did not need to understand monastic landholding to grieve for a child killed by his guardian. The legend became portable. It could be preached, painted, sung, carved, and retold. Each retelling strengthened the contrast between saint and villain. Over time, the story also entered literature. When Chaucer referred to Kenelm's dream, he assumed that readers or listeners would recognize the example. The prince had become part of England's cultural memory. Cwenthryth's name traveled with him, not because her historical achievements were celebrated, but because the saint's story required her crime. This is one of the cruelest forms of historical survival. Some people are remembered for what they built, wrote, conquered, or reformed. Cwenthryth was remembered mainly for an act that may never have happened. Her actual work as an abbess, her management of estates, and her legal struggle became secondary. The accusation consumed the person. Once the legend became famous, skepticism could not easily restore balance. A cautious statement that there is no contemporary proof will never possess the dramatic force of a child in a forest. The historian's task is therefore difficult. To explain the legend honestly is to retell it, and every retelling risks strengthening it. Yet refusing to tell it would erase the cultural history of Kenelm's cult. The responsible path is to hold both truths together. The murder story mattered enormously to medieval England, and its accusation against Cwenthryth cannot be treated as established fact. Return now to the forest where the story began. The mist has lifted, but the path taken by Kenelm and his guardian cannot be reconstructed with confidence. The thorn beneath which the body was supposedly hidden belongs to sacred memory. The spring belongs to pilgrimage. The dove belongs to miracle. Yet the emotional shape of the scene remains vivid after more than 1,000 years. A child looks toward a trusted adult. A weapon is raised. A sister waits for news. Soil falls upon a royal body. In the silence that follows, the murderer believes the story has ended. Instead, it has only begun. Medieval England remembered Kenelm as the innocent prince whose death could not be concealed, while Cwenthryth received the opposite inheritance. The historical woman faded from view, replaced by a legendary sister condemned as a murderer centuries after her lifetime. Perhaps that is the final mystery. The question is not only whether Cwenthryth killed Kenelm, but why later generations needed her to have done so. A saint's cult required an enemy, a monastery benefited from a powerful origin story, a moral audience wanted ambition punished. A royal abbess who had resisted Canterbury provided a believable face for betrayal. The accusation survived because it offered certainty where history offered fragments. It gave the forest a body, the body a killer, the killer a motive, and the kingdom a lesson. But narrative certainty is not historical proof. No contemporary witness names Cwenthryth as the organizer of a murder. No surviving judgment condemns her for killing a royal heir. The known succession does not match the story of a 7-year-old king removed so that his sister could rule. What survives from her own age presents a powerful and controversial abbess defending disputed religious property, not a proven assassin. Therefore, the fairest verdict must remain skeptical. Kenelm may have died violently, and a real dynastic conflict may lie somewhere beneath. The legend, but Cwenthryth's guilt cannot be established. The medieval tradition believed in Kenelm's martyrdom and remembered his sister as the cause. Historical evidence tells us that the accusation appeared too late and conflicts with too many known facts to support a conviction. Between those conclusions stands the silent forest, filled with every detail that time refused to preserve. Did Princess Cwenthryth order the murder of her own brother for power? The legend says yes, without hesitation. History answers more quietly. It tells us that a royal prince disappeared from the record, that a royal abbess fought for land and authority, and that later generations bound their names together in blood. It warns us that memory can create saints and monsters from the same broken past, and that the most enduring verdict is not always the most just. Kenelm's grave became a place of devotion. Cwenthryth's reputation became another kind of grave, built from accusation rather than earth. The first was opened by a miracle. The second has taken historians more than 1,000 years even to question. When the story is told now, the accused sister should no longer stand alone beneath the weight of certainty. Beside the legend must stand the evidence, beside the miracle, the chronology, and beside the villain, the forgotten woman who once governed monasteries in a collapsing kingdom. Only then can the story of Kenelm and Cwenthryth be heard in full, not simply as a tale of blood for the Mercian throne, but as a warning about betrayal, power, memory, and the dangerous ease with which a story can become a sentence.